Hola, good morning, wherever you are. I'm Guy Kawasaki, and I am sitting in my studio in Santa Cruz, California, where it is freaking freezing cold. So even I may not go surfing today. It is really cold. And believe it or not, I gave a talk this morning. I had to be ready on the camera at 4:45 a.m. And I went to bed around midnight. This may not be the longest episode of this talk, nor the most cogent. Remarkable People podcast. This morning we released Angela Duckworth. Well, not the person, we released her episode. Angela Duckworth is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. She is also a MacArthur Award winner. So she's the second MacArthur Award winner that I've had on my podcast. Numero uno was Stephen Wolfram of physics. Angela Duckworth got her MacArthur Award for her work in the application of grit to education, i.e., grit meaning working hard, not taking no for an answer. So, if you're into, let's just say, achieving things, and who would not be into achieving things? I mean, why else would you listen to Remarkable People? Why else would you listen to this, for that matter? Uh, Angela Duckworth is arguably one of the world's greatest experts on grit and determination and getting shit done. She has some great rules. She has in her family what she call. I also have allergies. The hard rule, which means that everybody in her family has to do something hard that takes practice, and you have to enjoy it. That's the second part of the rule. And the third part of the rule is you cannot quit it or give it up unless you give it up on a high note, which is, in other words, if you're trying something and you're frustrated and you're not succeeding, you cannot give it up. You have to give it up or give something up when you're kind of bored with it, but you've done it and you've accomplished it, which is like, think about that. That's a great rule. So that's the Angela Duckworth rule of quitting, is you have to quit on a high note. You cannot quit out of frustration and a low note. So I thought that was a great rule. So, in my humble opinion, if you had to look at the qualities that make one successful, I would say that grit is number one, and it is followed by things like vision, passion, intelligence, all that kind of stuff. If you gave me two people, or if you gave me a choice between two people, and one had grit and one had vision and passion and intelligence, I would pick the gritty person all day. I mean, I wouldn't say you take somebody absolutely stupid, but I mean, grit counts, and that's the story of my life. So you can start firing your questions about grit. Uh, One interesting question is, just ask yourself: do you consider yourself a gritty person? Do you quit easily? Because, as the saying goes, quitters never win. So let's see. You got any comments here? Because, man, I just uh well, when is it time to stop persevering and start to pivot? That is a great question, Jeff. And, well, for one thing, um, her rule about quitting is you quit something cold at the top of your game, or at least at a positive state. Now, pivoting is different than quitting. And I think that is one of the most difficult questions for any entrepreneur to answer, because if you look for inspiration from authors and case studies, there's absolutely two conflicting kind of cases. So one is, you persevered, you believed against all the negativity and all the naysaying, and you believed in it, and you just wouldn't give up. And one day, darkness turned into light, and you succeeded. The flip side of that is, that you started as one thing, you started one kind of business, it didn't work, so you pivoted, and it became successful. So the question is, should you gut it out despite all the negativity, or do you pivot and try something different? And both things can work, and therein lies a challenge in much of listening to quote unquote influencers and reading business books, which is, kind of depends on who you talk to last. And the only way you're really going to know is looking backwards. I would say that if I were to guess, I'd say that people quit too early or they pivot too early. Um, that would be my guess. Okay, see. Let's see. What about questions here? Grit is courage and perseverance. Yep, it sure is. It's not giving up. If I am a quitter, I really don't know about surrendering. Well, that didn't make sense. Okay. So you're listening from Kuwait and Malacca and Bangladesh and Morocco. Wow. We're definitely out in Slovakia. We're definitely outside the US of A here. Uh, let's see. Let's bring up Leslie's question there. Here, I can do that. How do you think grit changes from childhood throughout adulthood? I That's a good question. I think that grittiness is something you can learn. So I think grittiness can increase. Uh, I guess you could make the case that you could be a gritty kid and get fat, dumb, and lazy in your old age. That seems to be the arc of my career. Uh, but well, basically, what I'm saying is, I think that it is a learned attribute. I don't think you have to be quote born gritty. And if anything, I would think that the most important influence is your parents. That if your parents, forced you to do things, not give up, made you do chores, all that kind of stuff, I would say that's probably the single biggest factor in grittiness. And again, Angela Duckworth, I didn't win a MacArthur Award for my thoughts about grit, so you have got to listen to this podcast. It's really, really. Uh, it's challenging is what I say, and I don't mean challenging and it's hard to listen. I mean challenging in the sense that it will challenge you to step up your game, and that's a very good outcome of a podcast. Yeah, I'm scrolling through the text here so that I can see stuff here. Um, let's see. How about when you have lots of ideas to improve and motivate your team, but they are not open to change their culture? Well, I guess there's so many things to unpack there. So maybe you recruited the wrong team, or maybe you don't have credibility, or uh, maybe they believe in something more than you do. So, I mean, it's hard to answer that kind of question because there's so many possible explanations for what's going on. Uh, I could tell you with Steve Jobs' case, man, it was like you were greedy or you feared for your life, so, or at least your career. So it's not like we're sitting around the Macintosh division drinking white wine and sitting in our beanbag chairs with our Birkenstocks, wondering about the meaning of life. Basically, Steve Jobs said, "Get shit done," and you had to get shit done, or you're gone. So that simplifies life. If your industry is currently on hold due to COVID, do you carry on trying to move on? Again, Carrie Lee, this is a hard question. I mean, it depends on which industry. It depends on how it's shut down. It depends on, how you can turn lemons into lemonade, as the case may be. So I came across a really great example recently. Oh, okay. So the other night I was on Clubhouse with someone, or lots of people, and this entrepreneur from Kuwait comes on, and he says, "Yeah, when the pandemic first, he's in the business of kind of think of VR Verbo slash Airbnb, but for business, like conference rooms and workspaces and stuff like that. Okay, so Verbo Airbnb for workspaces. So at first, when the pandemic started, it just crushed him because guess what? Everybody was sheltering in place. Nobody would go out to a place to work or rent or hold a conference. But then as the pandemic went on and on, Come to find out, companies would not let their employees come in because they were closed, but these employees still needed someplace to work, if for nothing else than to get out of their house and a change of pace. So what he noticed is that people started renting his spaces, for hours at a time, just to work in better surroundings. And I would have never predicted that. I would have thought the pandemic would absolutely kill him. But he made lemons out of lemonade, or excuse me, he made lemonade out of lemons. So, I mean, that's an example of, how do you look at it? Is there some way that the pandemic actually becomes a positive factor? And uh, that's that's the way you have to look at it. I think by definition, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to look at the glass as half full. Um, Otherwise, you make yourself crazy. So, okay, is there a clear KPI for success? Well, I have a new theory about success, and I read about it in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And basically, he says that you do, what you do. So let's take my case. So, my case for podcasting, I think what he would say about podcasting is if you like or love podcasting and you want to interview people and get their remarkableness on audio and spread that around, if you do that really, really well, you can achieve success. But success happens because you did it really well, which is different than saying, I'm going to make a successful podcast. I am going to get this many subscribers. I'm going to get this much sales revenue. I'm going to get this much sponsorship. So I'm going to define success by subscribers and revenue. I think his attitude would be, you make a great podcast, and guess what? Revenue and sponsorship and subscribers will happen. So that's my new attitude with my podcast. So, see, I agree. Do you agree with Dr. Joe Dispenza that it's possible to pull what you want toward you without taking action and by simply surrendering? I'm more on the grit side of things, but always interested to get different perspectives. Perhaps depends on the type of person. So this, I don't know who Joe Dispenza is, but he's saying that you don't take action and you simply surrender and the magic happens. It's got to be more to it than that, because, wow, uh, I can't think of a case where that would happen. I mean, I guess if you're born into Donald Trump's family and then, all of a sudden you can get appointments into the highest levels of U.S. government, maybe. But, I'm not. A good test would be, you also, are you going to apply that to your family? I mean, basically, are you going to say to your kids, just be patient and surrender and good shit will happen? Boy, that's not what I would tell my kids. So there must be more to what that guy said than that. I can't believe somebody said that. But anyway, question: if you are facing a problem and want, I guess you're saying want to quit as opposed to what to quit, what questions do you have to ask yourself to know if you have to continue or not? They have great questions to have grit. Well, I think the existence of the desire to quit is not unusual. I mean, have we not all wanted to quit? Whether it's a job, podcast, writing a book. I could tell you, in fact, Angela talked about this in her podcast, that there were many, many times she wanted to stop writing the book that she wrote, Grit. And her husband continued to support her and force her to finish it. And I can absolutely relate to that. So um, I think it comes with grit. That I can't tell you that I believe grit is, 24/7 by 365, 100%. You're always gritty. I mean, even the gritty people give up, or want to give up. So I think that's the test. And a really good test is not so much that you can keep going, but can you keep going when things are shitty? That's the test. So what else? I'm thinking of grit in terms of all the great figures, creators, inventors in the world. The Wright brothers, Galileo, Gandhi, Steve Jobs, they gave their everything. Sometimes the bigger the change in human thinking seems, the grittier you have to be. Yeah, I would say that, Stephanie. So, uh, Jonah Berger, who was last week's guest, sort of delineates this between pebbles and boulders. So, some things for people are boulders, other things are pebbles. And so it definitely depends. So, getting an anti vaxxer to get vaccinated is probably a boulder. But maybe getting an anti-vaxxer to wash your hands, her hands or his hands, is a pebble. Now, you might make the case that uh, to get people started on the path, you ask them to move pebbles first, and then pebbles will give you momentum to eventually move boulders. Um, but yeah, there's definitely a difference between a pebble and a boulder. So I know that's true absolutely in my life. Yes. If you're showing true grit by going live on a little sleep and allergies, just reverse the bokeh. What? I understand the first part. Reverse the bokeh. Hey, my bokeh is built in here. Watch this. So, for those of you who don't know, Bokeh, half the people in the world pronounce it bokeh and half the people in the world pronounce it bouquet, is the concept of having, depth of field and stuff behind you being out of focus. And I pursued that. I pursued that, this fuzzy background for weeks to get it right. So, let's see. My question is, Roz, are you the Rosalind Jones from Apple? My question is, what are the 1 to 2 tips to be gritty without being a bull in a china shop? Gritty is getting shit done, but it does not mean stepping on people. Yeah, I never said step on people. I think grittiness is a different quality. So, if you were to make a 2 by 2 matrix, which all of the world can be explained in a 2 by 2 matrix, there's gritty, not gritty, and there's sheddy, not sheddy. And so you want to be in the gritty, not sheddy corner. You don't want to be in the gritty, sheddy corner where you're shitting on everybody. So, but I will tell you, I would rather have a gritty person who shits on everybody than a non gritty person who doesn't get shit done. So the second best corner is gritty and shitty. The first corner that you want is gritty, not shitty. But not gritty and not shitty is the worst corner, and not gritty. I'm saying that all wrong. You get my point, right? I mean, the key is grit wins, and ideally you'd be gritty and not shitty. But if you're not that, then I still think you should be gritty and shitty. I think I said that right. It's, operating on 4 hours of sleep. So, how can I measure my grittiness in a simple and effective way? If you're a man and you're married, you could ask your wife. How's that for an answer? Let's see. In my experience, I find that grit and passion often go together. True, yeah. For instance, if I'm interested in something, I will keep going and remain focused on it. But if it is uninteresting, I get bored and quit. Is that something that you find to be true? I would say yes, but there's a caveat, which is, do you find something uninteresting and therefore you quit? Is it really because it's uninteresting or because it's too hard? Or is it too hard and you're telling yourself it's uninteresting, so you're not affecting your self image of being gritty? So I think the hard part of that is, um, are you are you really quitting for the right reason? So I guess here would be an example. So, let's see, what could be a personal example here? So, uh let's say I'm just not interested in skiing. So I ski a little, but it just doesn't move my heart. And so I give up skiing. Okay. I mean, I think that's legitimate because that's exactly what I did. On the other hand, I love surfing, and I think surfing is harder than skiing. And it took me, I don't know, 6 years to become even a semi okay surfer. So I suppose if I kept skiing for 6 years, I would be a semi okay skier, but it just did not interest me. So, yeah, I think that supports your theory, but what I'm cautious of is that uh, you have to be open to finding things that are difficult and interesting, and not condemn things that are difficult as being uninteresting so that you can justify quitting. My mind is all twisted, but I think I said that right. Yeah. How would you explain grit to children that are home with me right now learning online? It's a concept which is always tough. No shit, Jade, handy, free sales. Uh, yeah, because with children, it's a fine line between, just like ramming stuff down their throat. And I don't know the answer to that question. But if you listen to Angela, she talks about the hard rule, which is again that you have to do something that takes practice, and you cannot quit on a low point, and you have to like doing it. Um, that's a good rule. So give your kid, just find one thing in your kid's life that all three qualities apply. Um, why do passionate people also keep failing? Yeah, Maria, if only the world were perfect and whenever you're passionate about something, you would succeed. I would say being passionate about something increases the probability that you'll succeed, but it certainly doesn't guarantee it. So, for example, I could never be a shortboarder, so it doesn't matter how hard I try. Uh, I don't think there is a guarantee. It's a matter of increasing probability of success. What else here? Do you think understanding where to apply your grit is far more important than just having grit? Also, how do you know when you should keep grinding and when you must stop to save yourself? Okay, this answer to the second question is I don't know. Um, I I would say that if you had to err in the direction of keep grinding too long, than thinking it's time to quit. So uh, when you think it's time to quit, keep persevering some more. At some point, yes, you quit, but I don't know. I think people quit too early, not too late. Now, how to apply your grit? Uh, I don't know. Applying your grit, again, we get into this very esoteric question about if you're having difficulty applying your grit, is it because A, you're not gritty, or B, you are truly uninterested, or C, you're uninterested because you're not getting immediate success? And that's the three things you have to ask yourself. I don't know how you get the answer to that, but that's something you have to ask yourself. What else? Has grit has grit to do a lot with personal upbringing? Do you feel that your family and culture may help you in your case? Absolutely. I really think that grittiness is largely because of the socialization of how you're brought up. And um, again, listen to Angela Duckworth's episode of the podcast, read her book called Grit. I would also say read a book called Mindset by, oh man, I am blanking out. Uh, God, I hate when I do this. I gotta look this up because Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck is her name. Carol Dweck. If you want to read about grit and mindset, those are the two books. Grit and Mindset, coincidentally, are the names of the two books. So, okay. Couple more questions because really I am just going to pass out here. Is there a different philosophy in different cultures? Do you experience grittiness in the same way? I think there is a difference applying to grit in different cultures. And listen, I consider myself American, not Japanese, but when you hear these stories, and I don't know if it's true, like I got Japanese DNA, but I don't know that much about Japanese culture. But when you hear these stories that if you want to be a sushi chef for the first 2 years, you're just cleaning the knives, and the second 2 years, you're sharpening the knives, and the fifth year is when you can finally cut a piece of fish. I mean, that takes dedication and grit. And then, oh, if you watch these YouTube videos about the living treasures of Japan, how they like spend when they make a sword and they just like lap the iron over and pound it and lap it over and pound it and just do it over and over and over and days just to get really strong steel. I mean, that's grit. Not clear to me I have that grit, but that's grit. And I tell you, Jeff C's listening to this because some of my grittiness drives him crazy, I think. But uh, the sequence for our podcast is I do the recording. It comes in separate tracks, the guest track and my track. Jeff puts them together and he gives me the unedited combined track. And then I go and edit. And I do things that just drive him crazy because I love to edit. I want to make every guest look as great as possible. So I take out all the ums and the you knows and the uhs and the rights. And you'd be amazed. In a 1 hour podcast, there are people who say 200 times, literally 200 times. So I like to take all of that out and I like to make it so that my guests, they're just like the most cogent, smooth interview ever. And that takes grit. I don't know any podcaster who spends hours and hours editing before giving it to sound design engineers. Of course, Jeff would say that I over edit. He has to go and undo my editing, but that's another topic. What else? You lose everything. No contacts. Contact lenses or people in the US. What 5 steps would you take to recover and point in the direction to become well off again? Well, that's so you're telling me you arrive in the US. Obviously, we have a new president, so now you can arrive in the US. And what first 5 steps would you take? I don't know about 5 steps, but um, let's face it, you got to get a job. And I am where I am because 2 generations ago, my grandparents came from Japan to pick sugarcane in Hawaii. So they didn't come to Hawaii to pursue their passion because they had a passion for cutting down sugarcane. They basically made a huge sacrifice. So their passion was improving the life of their kids and the kids of their kids, which they absolutely did. So, I mean, that's grit too. I mean, maybe one aspect of grit is to deprioritize your own personal well being for the well being of future members of your family. I'm going to take one more question, okay? Because I want you to go and subscribe to the podcast. It's at remarkablepeople.com and learn about grit from Angela Duckworth. And Jeff, you took that question away before I saw it. Who would you say is even more gritty than you? Well, Margin, I can't say that on the scale of grittiness, I'm like world class, all American, Tom Brady of grit. Okay. I'm really gritty, but so who is more gritty than me? I, phew, I don't know enough about many people's lifestyle and working habits to to tell you who's more gritty or who's less gritty than me. It's not like I am hanging out with Tim Cook and I see him get up at 4:30 and start answering email. And, I don't know. For all I know, he does that. For all I know, he wakes up at 10 o'clock. I don't know. So I don't think it's a contest about who's the most gritty. I just saying that we all need to be gritty or more gritty. And I've never met someone who I would say is too gritty. I'll give you a good sort of metaphor. So I think all Division 1 athletes have a great deal of grit. It's a non-trivial task to be a Division 1 athlete. But I would tell you, and I learned this because I interviewed Tim Kendall for my podcast. Tim Kendall was the guy who figured out how to monetize Facebook, seriously. And then he became president of Pinterest. But what I noticed about him and another person that I hired, they were both on the Stanford wrestling team. And I think that collegiate wrestling is proof of grittiness because, first of all, it is truly one person against one person on that wrestling mat, right? I mean, it's not a team sport. You don't get to coast behind, some superstar who's carrying you. It's just you and the other guy or the other gal and a referee. That's it. That's as simple as it gets. And at the end of a collegiate wrestling career, you don't go to the National Wrestling League where you get paid $5 million advance and a $50 million contract. There's no real path for professional Greco-Roman wrestling. So if I were you, I would hire people who were wrestlers because they are gritty. That's my management tip of the day. Hire people who were wrestlers because they never had a sport where they were thinking, oh, I'll get the NFL, NBA, MLB kind of big bucks contract. Clearly, it was not for the money. It was for passion and grit. So, with that, I think I'm either going to go to sleep or I'm going to go surf. It's so close. I don't think I'm going to go surf. So, it's Remarkable People. This week's guest was Angela Duckworth. Next week's guest is Lauren Coons. Lauren Coons is the president of a company called Pandora Bots. And in next week's episode, I actually interview a bot, a chat bot named Kookie. So it's Kookie and Guy and Lauren next week. Angela Duckworth this week, i.e. today. So if you want to learn about grit and what it takes to dent the universe, go to remarkablepeople.com right now and get Angela Duckworth's episode. And I bid you a gritty goodbye. Have a great week. Bye.